I guess we all, or almost all of us, have more than once imagined how things would be if the Beatles had appeared in these times. How would they sound? And although the question could have a trick, since they have influenced the way music sounds today, and that means that they could not exist in this context, we set ourselves the task of doing a little experiment. We compiled 10 current songs that have a lot of influence from the Beatles, and by current, we decided that they are no more than 10 years old. While a large percentage of the music that has been made today, and that has been made after the breakup of the Beatles, has some reference or technique that they created. But in this video, we wanted to play a little bit with how the Beatles could have sounded in the mainstream. Because of course, bands that specifically pay tribute to their music, or that play psychedelic rock, or some genre similar to the band's songs, would automatically sound like them. And there are thousands of those cases. This video is not that case. Rather, we focus on mainstream artists, consolidated, that consciously or unconsciously have winks to the Beatles, and make us think that if the Beatles existed today, they would sound something like this, fighting in the Billboard charts or winning awards. It will be an interesting video. Stay and watch. One band that has stayed in the spotlight despite all the changes in music are the Strokes. Their singer Julian Casablancas has constantly stated that he doesn't like the Beatles and declared that they were never an influence for him. But in 2020, for their album, The New Abnormal, there were a couple of songs that sounded very similar to the Beatles. Ode to the Mets was one of them.
Up on his horse, here anymore.
Fans kept comparing it, and they are certainly right. The way the melody sounds plays a lot with the Beatles' style. And even if he doesn't like them as much, maybe it gave an example of how they could have sounded in these times. This is one of our favorites. Have you listened to the song in detail? The bass sounds completely Paul's style. The guitar comes in like Harrison himself would, and the drums sound like Ringo, and the melody is totally Beatles-esque. This SZA song was #1 on the Billboard, and I always thought that if the Beatles existed today, they would sound something like this. I can't find a better example of being completely mainstream and sounding like that, because obviously, the Beatles would have wanted to be in the mainstream. DJO has many songs that sound a lot like the Beatles. Chateau is one of them. Tentpole Shangri-La is another, and there are a couple more in his concept. The interesting thing is that he managed to have great performance in streaming with his music. Millions of plays backed him up, something not common in most projects that play with nostalgia. He knew how to combine elements and has built a solid fan base. His music is a haven for music lovers and seems to be getting better every day. Mild High Club is an American psychedelic pop group led by musician Alexander Breton. Well, there are thousands of psychedelic pop groups, but they became very popular during the pandemic, especially because some of their songs were popularized in TikTok. Windowpane sounds like the Beatles from 1967, and it's certainly one of their best songs. Their latest album, Going Going Gone from 2021, followed more or less along these lines. To cheat or not to cheat? Well, being Lennon's son and wanting to make music doesn't make him guilty of sounding a little bit like the Beatles. The funny thing about this song by Sean Lennon is that it gives me the impression that it sounds like George Harrison's composition and not his father's. Even the voice itself sounds like George. Listen to it and tell me what you think. Billie Eilish is the most popular and famous mainstream artist of all the examples we have today. She completely changed the rules of streaming and revolutionized some of the current pop formulas. Billie has always declared herself a fan of the Beatles, and although her style is very marked, any professional musician could find slight patterns and influences in her composition that resemble those of the Beatles. Getting Older is just one example of many. Perhaps much of her success is due to how she replicated patterns and adapted them to new times and trends. Arctic Monkeys, just like the Strokes, are old school, but that doesn't take away from their evolution over the years. Body Paint is from their last album, but the band has been able to find ways that more than once have walked in parallel with styles and formulas that the Beatles used. For example, if in this album it was this song, in the last album maybe it was The Ultra Cheese, a song that sounded a lot like the Beatles. And so you have several examples. Comment here below. Which ones do you remember the most of this band? One of the pillars of American indie music is Clairo, and few songs like Sophia can have such a magical Beatle vibe without falling into the almost copy and paste tribute. You know what I mean. They take elements and transform them without making a copy of songs that today could not have the same impact as they did 50 years ago. This song is also one of the most famous and successful of her career. Many people compare it with Lennon's 1965 compositions. What do you think? SZA repeats in this collaboration with Doja Cat to show us how the elements left by the Beatles combined with elements left by hip-hop and Motown and R&B together can achieve these wonderful songs. Kiss Me more fuses them through the music of SZA and Doja Cat. The song even won the Grammy and keeps repeating instrumental or melodic elements that sound like the Beatles.
When the cold days come.
Are we closing with another trap? Obviously, Paul McCartney's songs could sound like Paul McCartney's Beatles songs. Despite that, sometimes Paul in his solo career has managed to sound very much like the band. And on his 2020 McCartney 3 album, he gave us this song that has all the elements of what could have been a Beatles song in this decade. Wow. If you don't like Paul's example, we could mention the cover that Phoebe Bridgers did of the same song. The point is that so far it is the closest example of what the Beatles could have sounded like in these years. Maybe Ringo was missing on drums, but now that Now and Then is released, we will have more elements to compare this kind of examples. So that's it for today. As we said, we didn't want to quote songs that copy the Beatles' formulas and styles, but rather artists that took some elements, transformed them according to their needs, and managed to make successful songs that everybody listens to. Write us here below if you have any more to add to the conversation, and we'll leave a playlist with these songs so you can listen to them in their entirety. That's all for now. Remember that you have the best opinion. Tell us below what you think about it, and what are your impressions of the album. Subscribe to our channel and like us. Thanks for watching. This is Music Box.